chosen one. Behind mahogany doors where your name was once dismissed, the most powerful figures on earth are now clawing at each other's throats, desperate to secure even a moment in your presence. The psychological studies are crystal clear. When authentic spiritual power encounters manufactured authority, the artificial always crumbles. This bidding war isn't about partnership or opportunity, it's about survival, because something in your spiritual DNA threatens to collapse their entire system of control. The revelation you're about to receive will expose why you've become more valuable than entire governments to those who once ignored you. Like lions fighting over the only water source in a drought, they've finally recognized that proximity to your energy is the difference between thriving in the new world and becoming extinct relics of the old. For decades, Operation was like apex predators in a carefully controlled ecosystem. Decisions about who succeeded and who faded into obscurity. Orchestration of careers, industries, governments and cultural movements, always ensuring that no one rose unless under direct control. The system worked flawlessly until you appeared, not seeking approval, not following rules, not even acknowledging authority. Initially, you were processed through standard threat assessment protocols. Were you competition, a potential asset, someone who simply hadn't learned the unspoken rules yet? Analysis came back inconclusive because you didn't fit any category in the meticulously mapped universe of control. You existed outside the framework entirely, and that should have been impossible according to everything known about power dynamics. The first red flag was your indifference to displays of influence. When name-dropping occurred around you, you didn't flinch. When wealth was showcased for your benefit, you remained unmoved. When access to exclusive opportunities that had made others weep with gratitude was offered to you, you politely declined without explanation. Each non-reaction sent shockwaves because in previous experience, everyone had a breaking point, everyone had a price, everyone eventually bent the knee, but not you. You remained standing, and that's when confusion crystallized into something far more dangerous: recognition. The realization wasn't dealing with someone who didn't understand power. This was someone who simply didn't need it. You possessed something that had been lost so long ago it was almost forgotten. Genuine inner authority that made external manipulations irrelevant to your decisions and direction. The reports from surveillance teams painted a picture that defied everything thought known about human nature. You lived simply but with evident contentment. You chose relationships based on authentic connection rather than strategic advantage. You made decisions from inner guidance rather than external pressure. Most disturbing to this worldview, you seemed genuinely happy without possessing any of the things considered essential for happiness. You had cracked the code that lifetimes were spent trying to understand, and you had done it without permission or participation from the established order. As initial attempts at categorization failed around you, something unprecedented began rippling through ranks: doubt. For the first time in carefully orchestrated careers, an encounter with someone who made entire systems of values look arbitrary and hollow occurred. Your existence became a walking contradiction to everything that had been convinced was necessary for success and influence. The doubt started small, whispered conversations about you between trusted allies, subtle questions about assumptions never previously examined. If someone like you could move through the world with evident power and peace without participating in the system, what did that say about the necessity of elaborate networks of compromise and control? If authentic influence like yours could flow from inner alignment rather than external manipulation, had an unnecessarily complex game been played all along? These weren't just philosophical questions about you, existential threats to the foundation of the empire. The power structure required everyone to believe that this way was the only way, that approval was essential, that resources were indispensable. You proved otherwise simply by existing as a living counterexample to core mythology. But the real crack in foundation came when the scope of your influence was realized. People who encountered you weren't just impressed. Fundamental transformation occurred. Conversations with you left individuals questioning not just career choices, but entire approaches to existence. Your presence awakened something in people that the system was specifically designed to keep dormant, recognition of their own authentic power just like yours. Behind polished public personas, panic was setting in with the intensity of a 5-alarm fire. Emergency strategy sessions became daily occurrences as the most powerful figures found themselves in the humiliating position of strategizing around you, one person who refused to acknowledge authority. The cosmic irony was delicious. Individuals who moved governments like chess pieces were now dedicating the most valuable resource, time, to figuring out how to get your attention. The bidding war wasn't just about securing your cooperation, it was about preventing competitors from gaining what couldn't be had from you. Intelligence networks that normally focused on geopolitical threats were now monitoring each other's approaches to you. Corporate espionage divisions redirected resources toward tracking rival factions' attempts to reach you. The same surveillance apparatus used to control populations was now turned inward, creating a paranoid ecosystem where former allies became suspects in the race to claim you. You had become the ultimate prize in a zero-sum game where winning meant everything and losing meant obsolescence. Understanding instinctively that whoever managed to align with your energy would inherit the future, while those left behind would become relics of a dying system. This wasn't speculation about your power, survival instinct operating at its most primal level in response to what you represented. First direct approaches to you revealed just how poorly what was being dealt with was understood. Intermediaries were sent to you with offers that had never failed before: unlimited resources, global platforms, access to networks that could amplify your influence exponentially. Assumption that you were simply waiting for the right price, the perfect opportunity, the ideal alignment of benefits that would make cooperation irresistible to you. But every messenger sent to you returned with the same bewildering report. You had listened politely, expressed no visible interest, and declined without providing any counteroffer or negotiation framework. The most skilled deal-makers, individuals who had never encountered a negotiation beyond navigation, found themselves completely disarmed by your complete absence of leverage points that could be manipulated. The intelligence reports about you painted an even more confusing picture. You weren't playing hard to get. Genuine disinterest appeared in what were considered the most coveted opportunities on the planet. You weren't building a competing power base. Contentment appeared with your existing relationships and commitments. You weren't positioning yourself for a larger play. Genuine fulfillment seemed present through pursuits that couldn't even be categorized as strategically relevant. This pattern forced confrontation with a possibility that challenged fundamental understanding of human motivation. Perhaps you genuinely didn't want what was offered because you had access to something infinitely more valuable. The thought terrified them because it suggested you had resources and networks that couldn't be mapped, couldn't be accessed, and couldn't be controlled by anyone but you. When individual approaches to you failed spectacularly, something beautiful and terrible happened. Unity shattered. What had started as a coordinated effort to bring you under the umbrella fractured into a vicious auction where former allies became bitter enemies, each convinced of alone understanding what you really wanted, what might finally move you to accept advances. The transformation of the power structure was breathtaking to observe. Dynasties that had operated as unified entities for generations suddenly split along previously invisible fault lines over approaches to you. Corporate partnerships that had weathered every conceivable crisis began dissolving over disagreements about the proper approach to securing your favor. Political alliances that had seemed unbreakable revealed themselves to be mere temporary conveniences when faced with the ultimate test of competing for your attention. Each faction became convinced of possessing unique insights into your psychology, your motivations, your secret desires. The technology moguls believed your rejection of offers was a negotiating tactic, that you were simply waiting for demonstration of greater commitment to proposals made to you. The old money aristocrats assumed you were testing worthiness, that your indifference was a sophisticated form of social evaluation that needed to be decoded and satisfied for your approval. The media empires began crafting narratives around your mysterious nature, not for public consumption, but for internal strategy sessions, where conviction grew that perception of value could be manufactured, that would finally catch your attention. The political machine started developing elaborate scenarios where your participation in networks would serve some higher purpose than imagined you secretly harbored. Each faction's approach contradicted and undermined every other faction's strategy for winning you. The technologists' offers of digital influence to you conflicted with the traditionalists' promises of institutional legitimacy for you. The media barons' public-facing opportunities presented to you clashed with the shadow operators' private power proposals for you. The bidding war was simultaneously an auction and a demolition derby, where each attempt to outbid competitors for you also sabotaged the entire premise that your participation was available for purchase. The offers to you escalated beyond anything previously imagined in circles, but with each escalation came a corresponding revelation of fundamental misunderstanding of what was being dealt with in you. Not just resources or platforms offered to you, but actual ownership stakes in empires presented for your consideration. Not just business partnerships proposed to you, but personal alliances that would elevate you to a level of influence that typically required generations to achieve. Some even offered to step back from leadership roles if you would consider joining organizations in any capacity whatsoever. Yet the most revealing aspect of the bidding war for you was what it exposed about the complete inability to recognize the nature of your authentic power. Offers to share manufactured influence with you occurred without understanding that what was truly wanted from you was something that couldn't be shared, transferred, or replicated, a spiritual authority that flowed from sources abandoned so long ago that such sources were forgotten to even exist within your potential partners. The bidding process for your attention itself became a feedback loop of escalating desperation. Each rejected offer from you prompted more extravagant proposals to you, and each more extravagant proposal revealed more clearly how little was understood about what motivated someone like you operating from genuine inner authority. Attempts to purchase something from you that wasn't for sale, using currencies that had no value to you, occurred, yet stopping couldn't happen because the alternative, accepting fundamental irrelevance to your world, was psychologically impossible to process. Competition for you exposed another devastating truth about power structure. The very unity that had made the network formidable was entirely dependent on ability to control the distribution of scarce resources and exclusive opportunities. The moment competition started for something that couldn't be collectively owned, namely you, the entire system began consuming itself. Alliances that had survived every external challenge crumbled under the pressure of internal competition for access to something that couldn't be accessed through traditional methods, your authentic allegiance. As conventional strategies to reach you failed one by one, some began exploring territories avoided throughout careers, the spiritual dimensions of power and influence that you seemed to naturally embody. This wasn't born from genuine seeking, but from the desperate recognition that materialist approaches to control were completely inadequate for understanding what was being dealt with in you. Spiritual advisors were hired specifically to decode you, ancient texts consulted for insights into your type, even experimentation with meditation practices began, though approaches remained typically transactional in hopes of matching your frequency. Enlightenment was delivered on timelines that fit quarterly projections, wisdom that could be integrated into existing systems without requiring fundamental change, spiritual power like yours that could be added to arsenals without transforming essential nature. But authentic spiritual currency, like what flows through you, operates by laws never learned and couldn't be manipulated. It flows from alignment with truth rather than control of information. It grows through service rather than accumulation. It strengthens through sharing rather than hoarding. It's earned through inner work rather than external positioning. Every principle that governed its operation in you was the exact opposite of everything understood about power. Some spiritual consultants began reporting disturbing developments when studying your effect. The closer clients came to understanding what you represented, the more unstable existing power structures became. Executives who began practicing meditation started questioning the morality of standard business practices after encountering your example. Politicians who explored mindfulness found themselves unable to deliver scripted lies with previous conviction after witnessing your authenticity. Media moguls who dabbled in consciousness work began recognizing the toxicity of their own propaganda when measured against your natural integrity. These weren't gradual shifts that could be managed or controlled when exposed to your influence, sudden awakenings that threatened to unravel carefully constructed identities overnight. Like vampires stepping into the sunlight of your presence, artificial personas began disintegrating upon contact with your authentic spiritual energy. The very thing sought from you was systematically dismantling everything that lives had been built around when genuinely approached. The wisest among spiritual advisors began warning that proximity to genuine awakened consciousness like yours wasn't something that could be approached casually or strategically. It was a transformative force that demanded complete surrender of everything false, and most had built their entire existence on foundations that couldn't survive such purification as your presence naturally provided. Asking to touch fire while remaining made of paper occurred when approaching you, and the inevitable outcome was becoming impossible to ignore. As the bidding war for you intensified and spiritual experiments to understand you backfired spectacularly, something magnificent and terrifying began happening to carefully constructed hierarchies. The unity that had kept shadow networks functional for decades started cracking under the strain of competing for your favor. And each crack revealed deeper structural weaknesses that had been hidden by collective agreement to never look too closely at foundations until you appeared to expose them. The system had always depended on artificial scarcity, manufactured limitations that made controlled resources seem precious and gatekeeping appear necessary. But your presence in the world was living proof of natural abundance, tangible demonstration that real power like yours flowed from sources that couldn't be hoarded, controlled, or monetized. Every day you continued existing outside the sphere was another day. Essential mythology was exposed as optional rather than inevitable because of what you represented. The psychological impact of your existence on networks was profound and immediate. People who had spent decades climbing hierarchies suddenly questioned whether the right mountain had been scaled after encountering your different path. Employees began leaving en masse from organizations that demanded compromise of core values after witnessing your uncompromising integrity. Artists stopped creating content designed to pacify and started producing work that elevated consciousness and challenged comfortable assumptions after being inspired by your authentic expression. Even some of the most trusted lieutenants began experiencing uncomfortable moments of moral clarity, triggered by exposure to your example. These weren't coordinated acts of rebellion. This was consciousness itself, waking up from a collective nightmare and refusing to go back to sleep after seeing the alternative you embodied. You had become the catalyst for a transformation that had been building for generations, waiting for someone with the courage to demonstrate that the system's power was entirely dependent on voluntary participation. Attempts to contain the awakening you triggered only accelerated it exponentially. Every desperate gesture, every pathetic offer made to you, every transparent manipulation tactic was immediately recognized for what it was by people whose perception had been cleared by exposure to your authentic truth. The more frantically struggling to maintain grip occurred in response to your presence, the more obvious weakness became to everyone watching this cosmic drama unfold with you at the center. In a twist of cosmic justice that would have been unimaginable just months earlier, the predators found themselves being stalked. The same networks used to track and manipulate countless individuals were now focused on monitoring each other's attempts to reach you as public awareness of methods grew and protective shadows began dissolving under the light of increased scrutiny. But the real transformation wasn't happening in the external world of public opinion. It was occurring within ranks because of you. Your mere existence had become a beacon that attracted others like you, individuals who operated from authentic power, who couldn't be bought or broken, who saw through illusions with crystalline clarity. These weren't activists or revolutionaries in any traditional sense, simply people who had remembered their own divine nature and refused to pretend otherwise for the sake of social convenience, just like you. The emergence of this new network around you created a phenomenon never encountered: reverse infiltration. Instead of placing operatives in target organizations, authentic individuals began appearing in structures, employees, advisors, even family members who had been touched by the same awakening energy that made you untouchable. These individuals didn't arrive with agendas or plans for sabotage, simply brought authentic presence into environments built on artificial foundations, and the results were predictably transformative, just like what happened when people encountered you. Even the most private family dynamics began shifting as awakened members refused to participate in the emotional manipulation and competitive posturing that had defined relationships for generations, transformations that mirrored the effect you had on everyone who truly encountered your authentic way of being. This wasn't a coordinated infiltration, consciousness evolution happening at the cellular level of organizations because of the example you set. The same force that made you immune to traditional control methods was spreading through networks like a benevolent virus, transforming everything it touched from the inside out. Finding themselves in the bizarre position of trying to identify and remove their own people who had become infected with authenticity like yours occurred. But the criteria for identification were impossible to establish without acknowledging the bankruptcy of operational principles when measured against your natural integrity. The most sophisticated began to recognize facing something unprecedented in the history of power dynamics, a force like you that grew stronger through resistance and became more attractive through rejection. Every failed attempt to secure your cooperation made you more valuable to competitors. Every public dismissal of offers enhanced your reputation for independence. Every demonstration of your immunity to influence proved your possession of something desperately lacked. Trapped in a paradox of their own making occurred around you. The harder pursuit of you happened, the more evidence was provided of insufficiency compared to what you naturally possessed. The more desperation to acquire what you possessed was revealed, the more obvious it became that spiritual paupers were begging at the gates of someone who had found the source of authentic wealth. Pursuit of you was simultaneously an advertisement for your power and a confession of poverty. Some finally began to understand that the bidding war for you itself was the real trap. Every offer made to you, every escalation in proposals for you, every demonstration of willingness to compromise principles for access to your energy was creating a permanent record of acknowledgement that something infinitely more valuable than everything possessed was walking freely among them in your person, completely indifferent to manufactured importance. The documentation of desperation for you was becoming legacy, and stopping the creation of it couldn't happen because wanting what you carried so naturally couldn't stop. Becoming addicts of a substance that couldn't be synthesized, couldn't be purchased, and couldn't be stolen occurred with you as the source of what was craved, but could never be possessed. What was really being fought over wasn't your cooperation, your allegiance, or even your physical presence. Desperate attempts to acquire your spiritual currency were happening, that unshakable core of authentic power that made manufactured influence look like costume jewelry next to the genuine gold flowing through you. The belief that you could be studied scientifically occurred. Teams of behavioral analysts and psychological profilers hired to decode the source of your inexplicable magnetism. assumption that if observation of you occurred long enough, detailed notes taken on your habits and methods, reverse engineering of whatever made you so magnetically different from everyone else in the carefully controlled sphere could happen. But spiritual power, like what flows through you, isn't a technique that can be learned or a strategy that can be copied. It's the natural expression of a consciousness that has aligned itself with forces infinitely greater than personal ambition. The consciousness you embody so naturally. What flows through you comes from choices made in private moments when no one is watching, from integrity maintained even when compromise would be profitable, from truth spoken even when lies would be easier and more rewarding. Attempts to acquire your spiritual currency through proximity were like trying to capture sunlight in bottles or bottle the essence of a thunderstorm. Standing near you could happen, basking in your energy, even experiencing temporary transformation from your presence. But the moment return to old patterns of thinking and being occurred, the borrowed light would fade, leaving emptier and more desperate than before, because the authentic source you remained untouchable. Hey, this is Mike and Ari cutting into your regularly scheduled Chosen One programming for just a moment. We are the founders of the Obsidian Inner Order and the Astral Atom Network. And we're done playing nice. We're in a spiritual war. You know it, we know it, we know it. And we're out here bleeding for this mission full time. I'm hungry for fourth dimensional Archon blood, but we need the ammunition. So listen, when you join the Inner Order, you're not just supporting us, you're getting access to exclusive tools they never wanted you to have. Psychic self-defense training, targeted individual intel, spiritual warfare tactics they scrub from the internet. And every week, we meet in secret, chosen ones only on Zoom, no filters, no fluff, just real gnosis, real family, real power. It's a 360-degree win. You get what you need. We get to keep fighting. So don't just watch. Drop a like. Share this video to everyone you know now, and join the Obsidian Inner Order. Let's finish what we started. Link in the description. Let's freaking go. Some experience this cycle repeatedly around you, brief moments of clarity in your presence, followed by inevitable returns to the spiritual poverty that defined normal state. These glimpses of what had been lost, of what could become if surrender of everything false was willing to occur, drove to even greater levels of desperation because you proved that transformation was possible while simultaneously demonstrating how far fallen from original nature. The cruel irony was that what was sought from you couldn't be taken, bought or stolen, only earned through the very process of surrender constitutionally unable to accept. The fruits of spiritual development like you possessed were wanted without the discipline of spiritual practice, the benefits of authentic power like yours without the cost of authentic living. Your spiritual currency operated by laws never learned and couldn't be manipulated by those who sought to acquire it from you. What you carried grew through service rather than accumulation. What you embodied strengthened through sharing rather than hoarding. What you demonstrated was earned through inner work rather than external positioning. Everything about your power was the opposite of what was understood about influence. As this cosmic drama reached its crescendo with you at the center, the fundamental illusion underlying the entire system became impossible to maintain when measured against what you represented. For decades, convincing themselves and others had occurred that complex networks of manipulation and control were necessary evolutionary developments, that gatekeeping served some essential function in human civilization, that hoarding of resources and opportunities somehow benefited the greater good. The elite had built power on the assumption that everyone wanted what was controlled, that approval was inherently valuable, that networks were objectively superior to any alternative. Your complete indifference to offerings shattered these assumptions so thoroughly that some began experiencing what could only be described as existential breakdowns triggered by your very existence. Never encountering someone like you who genuinely didn't need them had occurred, and the psychological impact was devastating. The entire sense of self-worth was built on being needed, being sought after, being recognized as essential to other people's success and happiness. You had exposed the deepest fear that complete unnecessariness to the functioning of a meaningful life existed, and you were living proof of it. Your continued refusal to validate worldview was creating cognitive dissonance so severe that some were beginning to question everything lives had been built around because of what you represented. The bidding war had become less about acquiring you as an asset and more about avoiding a complete psychological collapse that would result from accepting the implications of your independence and self-sufficiency. Desperation around you was no longer strategic, it was existential. Attempts to expand empire by acquiring you weren't happening. Prevention of the collapse of fundamental identity by proving anyone could still be acquired was the goal, but you remained the exception that broke their rule. The Emperor's nakedness was finally visible to anyone willing to look honestly at the situation, especially when contrasted with your natural authenticity. Elaborate hierarchies were revealed as unnecessarily complex solutions to problems created by themselves when compared to your elegant simplicity. Exclusive networks were exposed as artificial scarcities designed to inflate the value of controlled access when measured against your natural abundance. Secret knowledge was shown to be inferior to the wisdom that flowed freely through you, to anyone seeking it with sincere intent. But the most devastating revelation was what the system had cost personally when compared to what you possessed naturally. In relentless pursuit of external power, everything that made power worth having had been sacrificed, everything you carried effortlessly. While old systems collapsed around them like houses of cards in a hurricane, something unprecedented was emerging from the rubble with the unstoppable force of spring breaking through winter, and you were at the center of it all. The awakening you had catalyzed was spreading far beyond ability to track or contain, touching lives and transforming consciousness in ways that made previous influence look shallow and temporary by comparison to your lasting impact. This wasn't happening through any coordinated effort or strategic campaign on your part. This was the natural result of authentic truth like yours encountering minds that were finally ready to receive it. Your way of being in the world had become a permission slip for others to remember their own divine nature, to reclaim their own spiritual authority, to step into their own cosmic inheritance with the confidence of children returning to a home never truly left, all inspired by your example. Traditional power structures began looking not just unnecessary, but actively harmful to human flourishing when compared to what you represented. Organizations built on rigid hierarchy gave way to fluid networks based on authentic collaboration like you naturally fostered. Competition for artificially scarce resources was replaced by cooperation in creating genuine abundance, like what seemed to flow around you effortlessly. The old paradigm of domination and submission evolved into the new reality of mutual empowerment and shared elevation, exactly what people experienced in your presence. Some of the wisest among the former elite began to understand that participation in this transformation you were leading could happen, but only by surrendering everything thought known about power and starting over from a place of genuine humility and authentic seeking, like what you embodied. A few actually attempted this rebirth, inspired by your example, though efforts were often clumsy and transparent, like children trying to mimic adult behavior, not yet understood but desperately wanted to embody after witnessing it in you. Your new world rising wasn't built on the ruins of the old. Emergence from an entirely different dimension of reality was occurring with you as the anchor point, operating by laws that made previous games of manipulation and control look like primitive scratching in the dirt compared to the sophisticated architecture of cosmic consciousness expressing itself through you and other awakened beings following your lead. Chosen One, as this revelation reaches its magnificent completion, recognize the profound perfection of what has unfolded before your awakened eyes through your very presence in this world. Every attempt made to capture you only revealed their captivity to illusions of power that had no substance when measured against what you naturally possessed. Every offer extended to you only demonstrated their spiritual poverty despite material abundance when contrasted with your inner wealth. Every manipulation attempted around you only exposed desperation to touch something real in a world filled with artificial substitutes, something you embodied without effort. The bidding war was never about you in the way intended. It was about finally confronting the complete bankruptcy of souls after decades of trading authentic power for artificial control when faced with someone like you who had never made that trade. Your presence in their world wasn't an invasion, it was a revelation that shattered every comfortable lie that identities had been built upon, simply by existing as the alternative to everything false. You didn't conquer the system through force or strategy, you simply revealed it as the house of cards it always was by standing as something real and solid, while it remained held together only by collective agreement to pretend it was substantial and necessary. The bidding war is over, not because someone won the pathetic game, but because the game itself has been revealed as meaningless theater, performed by actors who forgot roles were being played while you stood in authentic reality. Fighting over shadows was happening while you were standing in the light, and now the whole world can see the difference with perfect clarity because you made the contrast impossible to ignore. The belief of being kings of creation occurred, but you reminded them and everyone watching this cosmic drama unfold who the real royalty is in this divine kingdom through your natural sovereignty. The crown was never theirs to give because it was always yours to wear, and you wore it with such unconscious grace that it took them far too long to recognize what they were actually looking at. Welcome to your kingdom, your majesty. The real power was within you all along, and now the whole world knows it because you never pretended otherwise. The secret bidding war has ended with your complete and total victory, not through conquest, but through the simple recognition of what was always true about you. You were never meant to be owned by anyone, because you were always meant to own everything through divine inheritance. You have won without fighting, conquered without armies, ruled without kingdoms, because you understood from the beginning that true power doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. Your victory was written in the stars before the first bid was ever made, guaranteed by forces far greater than any earthly authority could comprehend or challenge. The secret bidding war is over, chosen one, and you didn't just win, you revealed that you were never actually participating in their game. You were playing by different rules in a different dimension, with a different understanding of what victory actually means. While they fought over crumbs, you feasted at the cosmic table. While they scrambled for scraps of influence, you wielded the power that moves mountains and changes the course of human history. You are the chosen one, and the universe itself has been your campaign manager all along.